Welcome back to another Giant Monsters Monday. On the left, we have the Bandai Creations Godzilla 2000, and on the right, we have the Bandai SH Monsterarts Godzilla 2000. Both figures are versions of the design from the suit in Godzilla 2000 or Godzilla 2000 Millennium, to use the Japanese name. Movie came out, oddly enough, not in the year 2000, but in 1999. So let's take a close look at both these figures and see how the old stacks up with the new. Start off with the Bandai Creations Godzilla 2000. And if you're not familiar with Bandai Creations, they are basically Bandai's American branch, and their Godzilla figures sometimes are very similar to the Japanese releases and sometimes are very different. If I remember correctly, this version is very different than the original Japanese release. But it is a semi-soft vinyl figure. It's not super squishy, but it's definitely pliable. Here we have the head sculpt, and really not too bad for a figure like this. The details, pretty good. There's a lot of scale texture and everything. The teeth, while they are all kind of stuck on a single piece of black vinyl in there, they're raised up enough and detailed enough that it's actually pretty easy to ignore the connecting material, and kind of almost just looks like the teeth are there, which is really nice. He's got his little reddish pink tongue in there, little ears on the side of the head, the upturned eyes, and the fangs in front, which were something that kind of came back for this suit design. The large folds on the neck, the kind of different underside texture and the up top texture. Of course, one of the most famous things with this suit were the spines. They were big and purple tipped. This goes a little extreme with the color, but I kind of like it in a stylized way. As a movie accurate representation, I think it's a little too much. And also, the skin on that Godzilla was actually greenish, which is actually unusual for Godzilla despite the stereotype. So not really the best color combination on this figure for movie accuracy, but I like the bright purple. I think it's really cool looking. The spines are big and jagged and irregular, and they look pretty good. Probably one of my biggest complaints with the figure is the position of the arms. They're kind of just down and bent in a very awkward kind of pose. I guess it's kind of a stalking through the city kind of pose, but it's kind of hard to get him looking like he's gonna do any damage. And then down here at the legs, we have one that just kind of bent at the knee, and the other where he's kind of actually on his toes, which is a pretty dynamic pose, and I do like that. It's pretty nice looking. Of course, he has his yellowish toes down here, the kind of big toe back here, separate from the other three, which is cool looking. Coming down to the tail, they gave him kind of a stubbier tail than some of the other releases in the line, and it kind of curls around. I guess this was to make it fit in their packaging better and kind of keep a uniform packaging size for all these figures, and not really too big of a fan of that, except for in the fact that it takes up a lot less shelf space. For articulation, you weren't going to get much here anyway. He has a swivel just above the elbow on both arms, so they can just kind of go in and out. And then he has a V-cut at the crotch, so you can move the legs up and down a little bit. Not even the tail moves on this figure, so really just not a lot of articulation here. And now moving on to the SH Monsterarts version of the figure. This isn't really that movie accurate either, because it's not based on the actual film. This is based on concept art from Yuji Sakai, and if I remember correctly, Sakai did the concept art for the 2000 costume design, and he also has done a lot of the sculpts for these SH Monsterarts figures. So I don't know if it was, hey, you've helped us out so much on this line, why don't you put your version out there? Or if it was, oh yeah, Godzilla 2000, you mean the one they didn't pick my design exactly to replicate for the suit? How about I just make that? Nothing I've read anywhere about this figure has ever said that it was supposed to be a concept figure, but I just know of this whole concept angle from other reviews and looking back at some of the older pictures from the time, and this very much was the concept. I remember distinctly there was a lot of promo art that just showed the silhouette of Godzilla with the big ragged spikes, and very much matches this figure. But the sculpt on here is incredible. Very, very cool looking, very aggressively textured skin. It's almost sharp to the touch. It's very pointy and jagged and very, very menacing looking. Just like the other figure has kind of the upturned eyes. His ears are a little more hidden, just a little stubs here on the side. His nose sculpted in there. His mouth, he actually has 2 sets of fangs up in the front and then kind of midway through the mouth. The teeth have a nice kind of yellowish hue and the gums are well painted as well as the tongue. It's all kind of this very slimy looking red. As I said, the skin just has great texture to it. The hands kind of have longer fingers on them and long claws, making it look very, very menacing, very, very cool. Of course, coming back here to the spines, they are beautifully done. I like the very subtle kind of lavender purple on them. They are so extreme, so jagged looking, sticking out everywhere. Just very brutal looking. I really, really like this concept design of G2000. Just amazing looking. And the skin detail is just great throughout. It's a very solid charcoal color. There's very small areas like here on the chest where they've added a little brown to pick up some of the highlights, but beyond that, it's just kind of a solid charcoal, very effective. The toes have to be one of my favorite parts here. They're just very vicious and big, and I don't know, it gives the figure a sense of weight in my eyes. It makes it look like he's large and stepping on these feet, just putting a lot of weight on him. We can see it transitions here to the tail, kind of a smoother underside and still the jagged upper side with all the little spines going up all the way down almost to the tip of the tail. Very, very well detailed. What we've come to expect from the Monsterarts line. Very cool though. I really, really dig the sculpt and paint on this figure. And for the articulation, this shows that Monsterarts, if nothing else, is learning from each Godzilla release. I believe right now I have every sculpt of Godzilla they've done. The only Godzilla figure I'm missing from the Monsterarts line is the Comic-Con Explosion, but I believe that was just a redo of their original Godzilla mold. And I've reviewed all these Godzillas except for the Burning Godzilla, which I'll get to on another Giant Monster Monday. But we started off with a very beautiful sculpted Godzilla with that first Heisei Godzilla, but he didn't have a great range of articulation. And then when they did the Burning Godzilla, they ended up giving him a lot more articulation, but created larger gaps in the figure. With the Mosu Goji I reviewed recently, he had a better articulation without kind of showing as many of the gaps, but there were some issues. And here I could see they've learned even from that recent release and really upped their game. The neck is almost more like the tail has been than necks. It has a great range of motion, a bunch of separate joints on here. So side to side, he does fairly well, but up and down, just a great range there. You could really have him bending down and menacing humans on the ground or on top of a building. Up isn't as great. It does become hindered because of all the spines, and the head itself doesn't rotate up quite as far as I'd like it to, but not too bad. The jaw's articulated. You could open it fairly far. You can close it most of the way. It can't go quite all the way without popping out of the ball joint. Also deep in there, it's gonna be hard to do on camera, but his tongue is actually articulated. You could actually pull it up and it's on a hinge, and I put it up too far, but you could actually raise and lower that tongue, giving you some really cool roaring effects. As I mentioned, the neck is articulated all the way down to the base of the shoulders there, so really good motion all the way around there. For the arms, they've really upped their game. It's on a ball joint as usual, but there also is kind of a hinge joint in there, so you get a little forward and back, kind of reminiscent of the new Spider-Man figures of the older Toy Biz Legends. A double jointed elbow here. You could also swivel and rotate at any point in that. And then the wrists. If you remember the Mosu Goji had problems with the wrist peg popping out. Now there's almost a Hot Toys-esque little peg in the middle, so you can swivel. Then you have to find that point where it will bend, but you can actually bend back and forth on it and then rotate from there. So kudos to Bandai for adding that in there. It's a joint that I absolutely love on figures like Hot Toys, and it's perfect here on the Monsterarts line. In the mid-torso, we have 2 points of articulation. Really, the best thing they could be used for is bending down. You don't get a whole lot of articulation outside of that because of the spines. The spines really limit too much side-to-side movement. You can get a little bit, but they really do hinder themselves. And just one thing if I could change on this figure would be to take out some of these little wings on the back so that he could actually rotate a little better. But it's all part of keeping the sculpt together as well, so who knows what the trade out would have looked like, but a little limited around the mid-torso. Down here at the legs, we also have a great range. It's on some kind of dual system ball joint. You can see there's a little extra floating bit here in the middle, but you can go in and out, up and down, forward, back, all that good stuff. Bend at 2 points at the knee, as well as kind of rotate a little bit. And the foot is actually on another two-part ball joints. So it articulates mid-shin and then down at the foot itself. So you get a great range of motion there. And then perhaps one of the most beautiful tails Monsterarts has given us. It all kind of links together better than some of the previous releases. It moves so fluidly. It just feels different and better than the previous releases. Those still felt like you were moving a bunch of little articulated joints. This, it feels like a tail. It just kind of, I can't even describe it. It almost feels organic in the way it moves. The only problem is the joints aren't as tight as they could be, so trying to put the tail up, it does have a tendency to kind of sag back down, but still very beautiful, and it is articulated all the way to the tip of the tail, just like the Mosugoji. No dead area here at the end. Just very, very nicely done. Overall, I am going to give both of these the cult classic status. I know there are a lot of haters towards the Bandai Creations line, but I really dig this figure. I think it's a really good representation of Godzilla 2000, outside of the coloration on it, but I still think it's a cool coloration scheme they pick, so I can't really fault it there. And you have to look at it for what it is. It's a very inexpensive figure. Heck, at this point, you could probably go to Toys R Us and pick it up for less than you're going to be able to pick up a Marvel Universe figure soon. And granted, it doesn't have the articulation level, but it's fairly well detailed. And then of course the Monsterarts line, it's just a beautiful line, a well executed line, and one of my favorite things to collect. This figure was recently released, and from what I've seen, it's been sold out in quite a few places, so if you are interested in picking him up, make sure you do it sooner rather than later, or you might miss your chance, at least until he gets a re-release or something. But definitely a figure I love, so happy I got it for myself. Just an absolutely fantastic Godzilla figure. Even if it's not movie accurate, it still just looks so cool. Check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check out the Facebook page, there'll be a link below. And until next time, it's been another Outside the Box review, Giant Monsters Monday. Make sure you come back next Monday where we're gonna stomp all over Tokyo all over again.